Hello everyone, welcome again to our webinar, Continuity and Change in North Korea, 10 years of Kim Jong Un. My name is Elena Malfer. I'm actually a new entry of European Guanxi. I'm very happy to start this new experience with an interesting topic like the one of North Korea. Today we will focus on the latest 10 years of the country and what has the leadership of Kim Jong-un meant in terms of changes and continuity from an internal and from an international perspective. So Kim Jong-un's rise to power in 2011 generated much skepticism about the future of North Korea. Little was known about him, its inexperience and the lack of solid foundation within the circle was considered sufficient reasons, combined with the country's serious economic difficulties and international isolation, to doubt the effectiveness of this transition. 10 years later, however, it is easy to see not only how the regime has, let's say, withstood the blows, but also how Kim Jong-un's position has consolidated and he himself has gained confidence. Despite the many vicissitudes and the still persisting problems, such as, for example, the recent changes in the inner circle of power, the international sanction, and also the self-imposed closure after the outbreak of the pandemic, North Korea appears to be a stable country. So reviewing the decade of Kim Jong-un could provide useful indication of the trajectory of the young leader, with particular attention to the traits of continuity and eventual change, both within the regime and in its relations with the outside world. So I'm very happy to welcome here our speaker, Antonio Fiori. Antonio Fiori is an associate professor of history and institution of Asia at the University of Bologna. His research interests are aimed in particular at inter-Korean relations, domestic and foreign policy of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the People's Republic of China external relations. He has been a visiting researcher at the United International College of Zhuhai, the East-West Center, and the Kyujangkak Institute of Seoul National University. He has participated in numerous national and international research programs, and he is currently director and principal investigator of 2 capacity building projects on Myanmar, financed by the European Union. He is also the president of the Asian Institute located in Bologna, and among his recent publications, we have the Routledge Handbook of Europe-Korea Relation, the Korean Paradox, and also the 2nd edition of Il Nido del Falco, Mondo e Potere in Corea del Nord, which has been just published. So Antonio Fiori will present the most salient aspects of the topic for around 30 minutes. During the second part of the webinar, instead, all of us will have the chance to ask any question regarding the topic. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elena, and thanks a lot to European Guanxi for the invitation. It's very kind of you to have me this evening. It's actually a bit difficult for me to talk about the last 10 years in the history of North Korea in just half an hour, but actually I will try to do my best. Since we are celebrating actually the first 10 years in office of Kim Jong-un, actually the first thing that actually comes to my mind is basically the fact that when his father died in December 2011, many scholars, many journalists, everybody in general actually started to consider the possibility that North Korea and the regime of North Korea was going to crumble. Basically, there were 2 different positions. The first one was that actually Kim Jong-un was pretty much unexperienced, and this would mean a lot for the future of the country. Eventually, scholars were not pretty aware of what Kim Jong Un could mean for the future of North Korea. Nobody basically knew Kim Jong Un up to that point. And of course, actually, we didn't have any kind of, information on his political kind of capabilities. And so, many scholars, and many journalists, of course, tended to talk about the possibility that Kim Jong Un could only represent a puppet, and eventually it could be backed by more powerful and experienced officials. So many were basically expecting the fact that somebody else could eventually seize power and rule over North Korea in his place. On the other side, eventually, many other commentators started to look at the situation, and basically they, they hoped maybe that eventually North Korea could crumble very soon. What I can say this evening is basically that neither of the two options have has had any kind of both of them have been pretty much meaningless. Okay, because at this moment actually we are celebrating this kind of event that is 10 years in office of Kim Jong Un, and this means that basically he has been able, we can consider him as we want, but basically this means that he has been able to consolidate his power and eventually to consolidate himself as the real leader of the country. I want to be very schematic since we don't have too much time. So, the first thing I would like to say is basically the fact that Kim Jong-un actually was pretty much unknown, as I was highlighting, okay? We looked at North Korea and we didn't expect that basically his father, Kim Jong-il, could, pass away so soon, okay? He was only 60 when he died in December 2011. And, the first thing that we need to pay attention to is basically the fact that probably Kim Jong-il at that point had not prepared the terrain for any kind of succession. Okay, and this basically means that Kim Jong-un has seized power in North Korea without being prepared. Okay, what basically we knew about him was that he was the third son of Kim Jong-il, and basically he had studied in Switzerland, and actually he was a very, very big fan of MBA. Okay, these were all the information that we had on him. At a certain point, actually, in 2008, Kim Jong-il suffered from a stroke. Okay, and basically this put him in a very awkward position, and the regime, of course. Okay. And what happened at that point, presumably, was the fact that Kim Jong-il started to understand that he needed to, to choose a successor. I actually don't want to enter into, I don't want to go too much in depth with the ramifications of the Kim family, but very briefly, actually, the first son of Kim Jong-il was Kim Jong-nam. He had been exiled in a way. He could not live in North Korea. He was exiled to Macau, where he lived. And actually, this was due to the fact that at a certain point, actually, he goes to Japan, and actually he needed to reveal to Japanese authorities that he was the son of the leader of North Korea, and basically this put North Korea and the regime in a very, embarrassing position. Okay, so he was exiled, and actually there was no future for him in the North Korean regime. Okay, the second son, actually, Kim Jong-chol, was probably never taken into any kind of consideration for the succession, and this was due probably to the fact that he is too, let's say, politely, fragile. Okay, so his father basically considered him as, somebody who could not eventually react to the pressure of being, nominated the successor of the regime. And of course, actually, probably for him, the pressure, coming from the role of armed forces was too much to be borne. Okay. And the third one actually was Kim Jong-un. And as I was saying, he had studied in Europe, in Switzerland, and actually he was probably taken immediately into consideration for succession because eventually his father looked at him and he resembled in different ways his grandfather. Okay, so Kim Il-sung, the founder of the nation. So, this is a possibility. What happens is basically the fact that, in more or less between 2009 and 2010, actually, when we started to understand that Kim Jong-un was going to be the next leader, eventually he was, publicly introduced to armed forces and the population of North Korea. What happened was that actually we immediately understood the fact that he was pretty much unexperienced. Okay, he didn't have any kind of experience in eventually building relations with the armed forces, which are pretty much significant in North Korea. And on the other side, which is pretty much important, he didn't have time to build his inner circle. Okay, so eventually to create this important network that counts when you deal with the domestic policy in North Korea. So he was pretty much alone. He was not. He was totally unexperienced, and he was like somebody who was not prepared for the new role that actually he was going to be given. At that point, actually, the father builds a sort of, circle around him, made by those, intimate collaborators. The sister of Kim Jong-il, the husband, and a few military officers. Okay, and the role of these people had to educate in a certain way the new leader. Okay, at that point he was pretty much trying to understand how to rule over North Korea. And then, all of a sudden, on December the 17th of 2011, his father died. So actually, he was immediately, he took over immediately, okay? actually, at that very moment, we immediately started to understand that something was going to change in North Korea from the domestic point of view. Okay, and this is something that basically, has been seen in the following years. Okay, what has changed? Well, actually, what has changed is basically the strategy, the domestic strategy of North Korea. Okay, with his father, basically in North Korea, there was a kind of specific strategy that basically has been called the military first policy. Okay, what does it mean? Under Kim Jong-il, basically North Korea, also because of the famine that actually happened in the mid-90s, North Korea was a country that totally relied on the presence of armed forces. Okay, armed forces were basically the most important sector for Kim Jong-il, and this was pretty much important because, of course, Kim Jong-il, got his legitimacy, domestic legitimacy, from armed forces. Okay, eventually this policy was completely changed by Kim Jong Un. He understood that he needed actually to find a new strategy, and the new strategy that actually he started to implement was creating this gap from his father's policy and implementing a new one. The new one was actually very close to his grandfather's strategy, okay? That is putting the party at the very core of the regime's life, okay? So he basically understood that he needed to demote all the people that actually that actually had cooperated with his father, and all these people had to be changed by giving their positions, which were very important in the nomenclatura of the party, actually, of the regime, actually. These positions had to be given to other new people. So that he could eventually get legitimacy from, people who were totally new and in any way had served under his father. Okay, he needed to create a new circle of trusted people. Okay, so the party actually became very, very important. And above all, the party actually was, unlike the previous era, the party became the core of power, and it was basically detached from the massive control of armed forces. Okay, it basically there was a kind of ignition of civilians. All right, so the positions that previously had been seized by military officers actually were given to civilians, and this was pretty much important for the consolidation of Kim Jong-il. But in order to work for his consolidation, actually Kim Jong-un basically took other decisions that were much more rigid, in a sense. In 2013, for example, and this is kind of very important to understand something about his character. In 2013, actually, he staged the arrest of his uncle, and he executed his uncle. Okay, and eventually, these has 2, 3, 4, 5 different meanings. Okay, the first and the most important is that actually he wanted to show that he was building his leadership, and actually he could not depend on anybody's power. Okay, this is pretty much meaningful. Actually, we know, sometimes people think that actually North Korea is a kind of monolith, okay, where basically there are no movements whatsoever, and actually everything depends from the leader. Okay, it's not like that in North Korea. I mean, we do have this continuous struggle among different factions that actually want to take the position, a very close position to the leadership. Okay, Chan Son-taek, actually the uncle I'm referring to, was at that point a very powerful member of the regime, and actually he was probably trying to get as much power as he could, and in doing that he was also trying to actually build a kind of bridge with the People's Republic of China, trying actually to convince China that eventually he was it could be, put in a different position, at the leadership of North Korea instead of Kim Jong Un. Okay, so kind of political struggles that eventually were pretty much important for the decision that was taken by Kim Jong Un to execute him. Okay. At that point, this was also pretty much important in order to understand that even though Chan Son-taek was the uncle, actually, Kim Jong-un had no problems in eventually, getting rid of these people in order to consolidate his power. Okay, and this was pretty much important for his political consolidation within the regime. That is to be considered as a turning point, okay? Because at that point, actually, when he executed his uncle, we did understand that actually that move was aimed at giving a message to the population and eventually to the international community, that is, you don't have to consider me as somebody who is here and who is unexperienced and unprepared to rule over the country. I am understanding how I need to rule over the country and how I can eventually drive the country for in the future years. Okay. Of course, actually, that was a very important moment. Another important moment actually was in 2017 when he actually ordered the assassination of his stepbrother. It happened in Malaysia, actually, at Kuala Lumpur airport. He was pretty much, a victim of an execution, let's say. And that event again was aimed at making people understand that there cannot be two suns in the sky. Okay, I am eventually the only leader of North Korea, and actually this means that anybody can compete with me. And so my stepbrother, even though actually he lives in China, needs to be marginalized, and if this means that he is executed, it's okay. I have no problems in doing that. From the political point of view, actually, apart from this political consideration, the restoring the Korean Workers' Party at the very center of the political life in North Korea, actually, we need to say that, since the very beginning, and this has been done, publicly, actually, but since the very beginning, he has tried to, show his interest in the improvement of economic conditions of the country. Okay, every single time he gives a speech, especially the speeches that he gives on the first day of each year, actually he reconfirms that he is pretty much struggling in order to improve the conditions of the North Korean population. Okay, economically speaking, this is absolutely not true, because of course we do know that eventually, North Korean economy has still a lot of problems, and actually is not trying, to improve it in the right way. That is, eventually implementing some kind of reforms like China has done in the 80s, or Vietnam. But economy is always pretty much in distress, because North Korea, of course, is pretty much focused on the nuclear arsenal. Okay, and this is another point that eventually we need to take into consideration. They are having economic problems, and with the COVID-19, actually, these economic problems have become more pronounced. Probably we can talk about the COVID-19 in North Korea and what this means for the conditions of the country's economic system. The other point that actually I have just raised is, basically the fact that in the last 10 years, North Korea has become one of the most important nuclear armed countries in the world. And in doing this, actually, Kim Jong Un has been very able. He has launched missiles, any kind of missile, actually, short-range missiles, long-range missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles. He has performed, 4 nuclear tests, underground nuclear tests, and eventually this has projected North Korea in the, let's say, in the kingdom of nuclearized states. Okay, and this, of course, has meant a lot for the international projection of North Korea as well. We will talk actually very briefly about North Korea's relations with both the United States and the People's Republic of China. But, eventually, what has been pretty much meaningful is the fact that, North Korea has become a threat for any US president in the last, let's say, 4 decades. Okay, it is not easy to solve the so-called North Korean issue for any of the US presidents. It is absolutely not easy for Biden nowadays. It has not been easy for Trump, even though actually we do remember that actually Trump has met with Kim Jong Un officially 2 times, and another time actually on the borders between the 2 Koreas. What actually is the message I would like to convey is that, even though North Korea is pretty much considered as one of the most important threats, politically speaking, actually, at the international level, being having reached this advanced stage from the nuclear point of view has allowed North Korea to, to sit at the same table and to negotiate with the American president. So actually, this means that the nuclear arsenal has become pretty much an important factor in the foreign policy of the country. And in doing this, actually, Kim Jong Un has been pretty much talented in a sense. He has understood the strategy, and he actually has implemented it in a very brilliant way, I would say. What kind of relations actually Kim Jong Un has had with the international community in the last 10 years? Well, when we talk about the foreign policy of Kim Jong Un, actually we can divide, we can roughly divide two different phases, let's say. Okay, the first one was the stage of complete isolation. Okay, basically, for the first 6 or 7 years, Kim Jong-un has decided not to meet with anybody, not to have any kind of active relationship, not even with China. And this is a very, very important point, actually. Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un met for the first time immediately before the meeting that Kim Jong-un had with President Trump in 2018. For several years, actually, there were no relations whatsoever between Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping. And this was pretty much unprecedented because, of course, I need to remember that actually North Korea and China are still linked by a treaty of amity that was signed in 1961. And of course, you all know that actually China is the most important economic partner that actually North Korea has. The fact that actually they didn't have any kind of relationship probably means that Xi Jinping was pretty much frightened by the fact that North Korea could create a certain degree of instability in the region. Okay, I'm not saying that actually Xi Jinping or the PRC wants the regime to crumble. It's not like that. It's eventually the opposite. China wants North Korea to remain stable, the regime to remain stable, but eventually China doesn't like actually North Korea performing nuclear tests and launching missiles, because this eventually means that the international community is pretty much worried, and this also means that eventually the United States can intervene in that region, and of course this would mean obscuring the possibility that China does what it wants to do in the neighborhood. Okay. On the other side, we have had this kind of intimate relationship that actually Kim Jong-un has built with President Trump, paradoxically speaking, because Trump actually is one of those presidents, one of those American presidents who has decided, to have this kind of direct and very rigid posture to the North Korean threat. So, in 2017, for example, actually, North Korea and the United States were almost on the verges of war. But then we have had two meetings, one in 2018 in Singapore, and the following one in 2019 in Hanoi, Vietnam. Both of them were very meaningful. The first one was actually pretty much important. It was the first time that actually, a U.S. Standing president met with the leader of North Korea. But actually, the relationship was broken in Hanoi during the second meeting because eventually, according to me, Kim Jong Un was playing the only strategy that he could play, that was, trying to negotiate with the Americans in order to ease, in order to lift the international sanctions that actually are affecting North Korean economy, are preventing North Korea from any kind of growth, economic growth, and eventually, these kind of sanctions that have been applied by the United Nations Security Council are, putting North Korea in a state of distress. Okay, and actually, the proposal that he made to Trump was to lift all sanctions, from which actually North Korea was affected. On the other side, actually, the Americans cannot even, take into consideration this possibility, because the Americans have always had this kind of idea that, according to me, doesn't pay and basically should be changed. That is, America wants actually North Korea to completely dismantle its nuclear arsenal before eventually, reconnecting or creating, how to say, a good relationship with the Asian country. Of course, North Korea is not eventually dismantling its arsenal. It would be stupid, pass me the expression, actually, for a country which has basically relied on the construction of these nuclear arsenal for the last 4 decades, actually, to dismantle everything. And on top of that, actually, North Korea and Kim Jong Un in particular has always, presented this nuclear arsenal as a kind of defensive factor rather than, an offensive kind of factor. Okay, and in order to complete these, actually, we need to take into consideration also the fact that eventually North Koreans and Kim Jong Un again knows very well what has happened with Libya, for example. So actually they are absolutely and totally horrified by the possibility that, America actually puts implements kind of Libyan model on North Korea, because that would mean, according to North Koreans, to the North Korean regime, that would mean the complete demotion of the regime itself. So they do not like this idea. This idea for them is totally unacceptable. And this was probably the idea that again Trump brought to the table in 2019 when he met Kim Jong Un in Hanoi. So since I actually would like to, understand if you have questions. I'm sure that you have questions, and I'm sorry if I actually have, gone randomly, but eventually there are many things we can say, we can talk about when we deal with North Korea and Kim Jong Un. But in the end, eventually, what I can say is that I do consider Kim Jong Un, after 10 years, I do consider him totally consolidated from a political point of view. He is the absolute leader of North Korea. Even on January the 1st, actually, he has talked again about the necessity of North Korea to continue, developing its nuclear arsenal, and on the other side, trying to build, good, trying to implement, positive reforms for for good outcome from the economic point of view. I mean, is also the first leader of North Korea that actually tells to his people that he is pretty much sorry for not having been able to implement any kind of reform from the economic point of view. So he's also the first kind of sincere leader that we do have in North Korea up to this point. And from the international point of view, and then I close actually, from the international point of view, after Trump, actually we have not had any kind of relationship with the United States, even though, Biden and his administration have basically told North Korea that they are pretty much, disposed to meet with Kim Jong Un and at any time, but eventually the fact that Biden for sure actually wants to doesn't want actually to negotiate on the lifting of sanctions, on the possible lifting of sanctions actually, has put the bilateral relations into a condition of stalemation. And then, on the other side, we do have very good relations with the People's Republic of China. Xi Jinping and Kim Jong Un have met a number of times now. Very good relations with Putin's Russia. And, I haven't actually talked about the relations between North Korea and South Korea in the last 10 years, which have been modified also by the fact that South Korea has had a progressive president. And so this basically means that he wanted to seek a dialogue with North Korea. But if you want, actually, we can touch, on this point in the Q&A section. So I thank you very much, and I look forward for your questions.
Thank you very much for the interesting explanation. So I would now switch to the Q&A session. I would like to pose the first question to our speaker. And for the first question, I wanted to specifically focus on the Chinese-North Korean relations. So you already explained a lot about it, but I wanted to ask you, since just 2 years after the power transition in North Korea, another leader has taken power in China, so Xi Jinping, of course, who has been a leader who has introduced important changes in the Chinese attitude towards its foreign policy, such as I'm thinking about, for example, the red line diplomacy. So I would like to ask you, how have the relations changed with the rise of these two new leaders who have brought major changes in the two countries?
Okay, and the red line diplomacy, actually, let me take notes, actually. The red line diplomacy that Xi Jinping has implemented is a very good point, because the red line diplomacy, theoretically speaking, has been applied to North Korea. I mean, that is what I was referring to a few minutes ago. That is, of course, actually, Xi Jinping doesn't want, North Korea to trespass, to, overcome a certain limit, okay, in the relationship between China and North Korea. But let me tell you something before specifying what I am thinking of. I would like to clarify a point which is pretty much important, at least for me. The point is that actually everybody knows that China is pretty much important for North Korea from the economic point of view. Okay, the most important partner actually in the country that provides economic support to North Korea. It's really important from the economic point of view. Many scholars actually tend to think that without the economic support from the People's Republic of China, actually North Korea would crumble. Okay, but this does not mean that actually North Korea is in the ends of China. That basically means, politically speaking, actually, North Korea is pretty much a sovereign country with its own leader, its consolidated leader, that basically takes decisions for the future of North Korea. And this, basically, the fact that China buys coals or sands from North Korea doesn't mean that, as Trump actually was convinced of, that it doesn't mean that actually North Korea is controlled, politically speaking, by the People's Republic of China, okay? We are talking about two distinct countries. And sometimes this also means that actually China doesn't like what North Korea does. Okay, and the red line diplomacy actually was very important, because when Xi Jinping decides, to implement this kind of policy, it's a message that is conveyed to the neighborhood and of course to North Korea. That basically means, if we want to translate it, actually we could translate it by saying that Xi Jinping was eventually suggesting Kim Jong Un and the North Korean leadership not to overcome a certain limit. That basically means you need to stop here, because if you do, if actually you do some actions, these actions eventually could become dangerous for China, and you don't have any kind of authority to do that. Okay, so this means eventually this is the explanation why for a number of years actually North Korea and China had so many relational problems. The moment actually the most important moment came soon before the first meeting with Donald Trump, Kim Trump, actually, when both of them, Kim Jong Un on one side and Xi Jinping on the other side, perfectly understood that they needed to put aside their reciprocal, disgust, let's say, and eventually they needed to meet, because of course, actually, Xi Jinping wanted to understand what was on the table in the negotiation with the United States. And on the other side, actually, Kim Jong-un wanted Xi Jinping actually to bless him and say, probably, actually, this is the strategy, the negotiation strategy that you need to follow when you sit at the table with Donald Trump. Okay, so eventually, at that moment, times were mature enough in order to find a kind of reciprocation and a rapprochement between the two countries. Since that moment, actually, relations have matured in a way. Xi Jinping has visited Pyongyang. Kim Jong-un actually has gone to Beijing again and again. They have met, their families have met. I'm not saying that all of a sudden actually they like each other, but eventually they have understood that they needed to build this relationship on a very stable basis. And this is pretty much important for China. China doesn't want the North Korean regime to crumble. China doesn't want any kind of, the application of any kind of Libyan model. I mean, it's not convenient for China actually to have a completely demoted North Korea, okay? China wants actually the regime of North Korea to be, the same, and eventually to have good relations with South Korea, okay? Because China is pretty much interested in actually having a Korean peninsula which is not in a state of terror, of war or conflict, because actually, and this is a very important factor, China, since 2004, has also become the most important trade partner of South Korea. And so having a stable peninsula actually means a lot for Xi Jinping, means a lot for the Chinese leadership.
Okay, thank you very much. So I wanted to ask you another question, since you mentioned the United States and the importance of the United States. So I wanted to further analyze the US role and the attitude not only towards North Korea, but towards the China and North Korea relationship. So first of all, I wanted to ask you, how has the Biden election been welcomed by Kim Jong Un after Trump, and all we have said about the relation between Kim Jong Un and Trump? And furthermore, I wanted to ask you about, as I said, the United States strategy in the Southeast Asian region. So both North Korea and China are important issues. And I wanted to ask you, does this particular relation between the two states, so China and North Korea, represent a positive or a negative thing for the US strategy? So is the US affecting this, this relationship in some way?
This is a very good question, actually. What can we say about that? Let's start from Biden. I mean, there was no reaction whatsoever in North Korea when Biden was elected. Okay, they never actually very, you know, joyfully expressed their sentiments. So basically, I mean, North Koreans, you know, did not react to Biden's election. Okay. They are now, and Biden, of course, was, you know, he actually immediately understood that possibly he could not follow the steps of Trump when it comes to the North Korean issue. Okay, he needed eventually to distance himself from the policy that had been adopted by President Trump. Okay. On the other side, actually, I mean, the options that the US have in order to tackle, in order to face North Korea are quite limited in a sense. Okay. I mean, we could talk about these for hours, but we're talking about limited options. I mean, they could move war to North Korea, aimed at destroying North Korea eventually, but these opens an immense window. I mean, we need to take into account how North Korea would eventually defend itself and what would be, you know, the consequences for Seoul and the neighborhood in China. And I don't even want to take into consideration the possibility of conflict. And then actually, you know, Biden is also taken into consideration the possibility to start a new negotiation with North Korea. But as I was saying, actually, the principles are, how to say, specifically aimed at making North Korea renounce to its nuclear arsenal. Okay. And eventually, North Korea doesn't want actually to negotiate on this kind of basis. They are not going to renounce to nuclear arsenal. That's for sure. So there are many nuances, let's say, but actually it's very complicated for the Biden administration to have a strategy in this case. When it comes actually to China, North Korea, this is a very good point. You know, and this is a very good point, actually, because, of course, this makes, you know, possible solutions that eventually the US could find even more complicated. I mean, you have this kind of axis between Beijing and Pyongyang. And of course, actually, you need to take into account the fact that, you know, these two countries are linked by a treaty, and eventually they, you know, would eventually defend each other. I mean, I'm not really, you know, convinced of the fact that in case of war, you know, Beijing would eventually defend North Korea from an attack coming from the United States. But you know, at least you know, theoretically speaking, actually, that would be what you know, what will happen. The fact that actually, you know, puts the United States in a very awkward position is basically, you know, the fact that the US sees North Korea as a threat to security, and above all, a threat to Japan. Okay, a constant threat to Japan. And this is also to be understood as the fact that I am pretty much sure that actually Beijing would not oppose to Pyongyang's provocations eventually. Okay, and of course, actually, this means that the United States and Biden, in particular, these days, has to deal with a combination between Beijing and Pyongyang. If you look at Taiwan Strait issue, for example, I mean that is pretty much important. We absolutely know that these days the Taiwan Strait issue has become pretty much important for China, and of course for the United States, as a reaction to the offense that actually China is launching on Taiwan. Okay, now what would happen in case of war between China and Taiwan? Of course, actually, what we do expect is basically the fact that the U.S. would intervene. What happens with North Korea at that point? I mean, how North Korea can react in these kind of given possibility. I mean, and of course, actually, the U.S. would not be in a very easy position if it has to confront with China on Taiwan and North Korea on the other side. I mean, that would be pretty much difficult for anybody, and for Washington for sure. Actually, I mean, it's very difficult.
Yeah, we understand that. So I wanted to ask you a last question, since we are running out of time. I choose one from the public, and they ask, do you think that like regarding the North and South Korean issue, since we wanted to like leave a little time to that, do you think that Moon is acting too hastily in attempting to declare the end of war in principle?
Wow. No, I actually supported Moon for what this means. I mean, I think that Moon was a very good president when it comes to foreign policy of South Korea, when it comes to these kind of attempt to recreate this kind of dialogue with North Korea. Moon was a very good president in that regard. Probably not a very good president when it comes to South Korea's economy, but actually when it comes to North Korea, in the end, I do think that actually we need to keep North Korea engaged. Okay, I am totally against the possibility of new sanctions. I don't think that actually international sanctions have changed or will change the situation. What we know, because we have data on these, actually what we know is for sure that sanctions are affecting the population, not the regime, and this means that they are totally useless. When it comes to Moon, he has done a terrific job in order to rebuild these dialogue with North Korea. He was pretty much effective, and frankly speaking, I really hope in the coming elections in South Korea. Actually, that they are going to the polls in March for the new president. I really hope the conservatives will not succeed, because this means that the entire process of rebuilding a dialogue with North Korea will be badly affected. Okay, but this said, actually I do think, and the question is very, very, very good, actually I do think that what Moon has been doing is only the beginning. Okay, we should not talk about a peace treaty. A peace treaty is something that eventually, if they want to do that, if they want to get to that point, actually the two leaders of North Korea and South Korea could eventually sign tomorrow morning. Okay, given the fact that eventually we still do not know what parts eventually will have to be involved in a peace treaty. Okay, the UN, the US, China, who? But let's put this point aside. They could eventually sign a peace treaty tomorrow morning. But it's not the point. It's not the peace treaty. The peace treaty needs to be a small spot actually in a bigger picture that is a peace regime that is totally different from a peace treaty. A peace treaty is something that can be considered as a factor of a peace regime, but a peace regime is actually something more, something bigger, something more important. A peace regime is actually building trust, enacting, trust building measures, enacting, connections between different institutions from on one side, on the other side, enacting, kind of connection from a people to people point of view. I mean, this is not easy. This is not easy, and this is eventually what I think it's pretty much important in recreating this positive terrain, between the two countries. I mean, I just close with this question: what does it mean to sign a peace treaty if the day after having signed a peace treaty, the two countries actually look each other in, hastily? I mean, not considering actually each other as an ally, as a partner, as somebody you can trust. I mean, at that point, actually, the signature of a peace treaty would be pretty much useless. So we need to prepare the terrain. We need actually to, eventually aim at the creation of a peace regime that actually, involves the signature of a peace treaty. But we don't have to limit actually to that.
Okay, thank you very much again. And I thank you all for having participated to this webinar. Hopefully we have given you some interesting, useful information, but also I would say some starting points for further discussion. So I wish you all a nice evening and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.